The storm that trapped Zara Thornton at Sunrise Ranch wasn't an act of God. It was an act of war. She just didn't know it yet. Lightning split the Montana sky, and the autumn wind howled like a hungry wolf. Zara clutched the reins, her knuckles white, her horse fighting against the gale. The stagecoach accident had left her stranded, her belongings scattered, her world reduced to what she could carry in her saddlebags. She'd been traveling for days, a lone woman against an unforgiving land. The scent of rain was the scent of trouble. Through the sheets of rain she saw a light, a single golden eye in the darkness. A ranch house. Clayton Foster watched her from the second-story window. He saw a lone rider, a ghost battling the elements. At 26, he'd built a life here in Paradise Valley, a life of hard work and quiet solitude. But there was nothing quiet about the storm, or the woman riding through it. He saw her horse rear as thunder cracked overhead, a sound like the sky breaking apart. He didn't hesitate. He was already moving. The rain was a solid wall by the time Clayton reached her, water pouring from the brim of his hat. He guided his horse alongside hers, his presence a sudden, solid shield against the storm. "You're welcome to wait this out at my ranch," he shouted over the wind. "Just over the rise." Zara looked up, relief washing over her face. "I would be most grateful, sir. My journey has become more adventurous than I anticipated." Even soaked and struggling, she had an air of refinement. Her voice was from back east, Boston maybe, and her jaw was set with a determination that didn't belong to a woman who gave up easily. This was no ordinary traveler. Clayton knew it in his bones. He helped her dismount on the porch of his ranch house, his hands lingering at her waist for just a second too long. Their eyes met. In that moment, the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that sparked between them. Then another crack of thunder broke the spell, and the world rushed back in. "Let's get you inside," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. The warmth of the house was a shock. A fire blazed in a massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The main room was simple, built for function, not for show. But there was a large bookshelf in the corner, overflowing with books that seemed out of place on a simple Montana ranch. "I'll fetch you something dry," Clayton said, his gaze taking in her soaked riding clothes. "My sister left some things behind." When Zara emerged from the washroom, wrapped in a simple wool dress that was too big for her but blessedly warm, Clayton had a bowl of stew waiting. She looked different now, softer, the hard edge of survival momentarily gone. But the storm wasn't just outside. It was in her eyes. "The creek will be flooded by morning," Clayton said as they ate. "You won't be leaving for a few days." Her spoon paused. Disappointment flickered across her face, followed by something else. Resignation. As if she was used to her plans being destroyed, as if she was used to being trapped. "I was supposed to start my new position as the school teacher in Livingston," she said, her voice quiet. "Sometimes the unexpected turns aren't disasters," Clayton replied softly, his eyes holding hers across the small table. "Sometimes they're just different paths." But he knew this wasn't an unexpected turn. There were no accidents in this valley, not anymore. And the path Zara Thornton had just stumbled onto was far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. For 3 days, the storm raged. For 3 days, they were prisoners in the ranch house, the world outside reduced to a howling fury of wind and rain. They talked for hours, their life stories unfolding in the flickering firelight. She was a school teacher from Boston, seeking independence in the West. He was a rancher who had carved a life from this valley with his bare hands. It was all a lie, a beautiful, dangerous lie. On the 4th morning, the sun finally broke through. The creek was still too high to cross, but the world felt clean, new. They walked the edge of the pasture, the wet earth soft under their boots. "It's beautiful here," Zara said, looking at the snow-capped mountains. I felt it the first time I rode through this valley, Clayton admitted, his voice low. Like I'd found the place I was meant to be. But his eyes weren't looking at the mountains. They were looking at the neighboring property, at the sprawling, arrogant ranch that belonged to Silas Croft, the man who had taken everything from him. A coldness touched Clayton's expression, so fast Zara almost missed it. But she didn't. She saw the hunter lurking behind the kind rancher's eyes. She saw the ghost of a different man. The next day, the creek was passable. Clayton escorted her to Livingston. Her new life was waiting, a small schoolhouse, a room at the hotel, a town full of strangers. Their farewell was formal, polite. But as they shook hands, her fingers lingered in his. Livingston isn't so far, Clayton said, his voice quiet. You could ride out to the ranch on Saturdays. I'd like that very much, she replied, a real smile finally breaking through her guarded expression. He watched her walk into the hotel, a woman who had crashed into his life like a bolt of lightning. She thought she was starting a new chapter. She had no idea she had just walked into the final act of his. The weeks that followed were a carefully constructed courtship. Clayton would find reasons to be in Livingston. He'd appear outside her schoolhouse just as the children were dismissed. They would take walks. They would share meals. The town watched, and they approved. The handsome, hard-working rancher and the refined Eastern school teacher. It was a perfect match. Zara found herself falling for him. For his quiet strength, his surprising intelligence, his gentleness. The nights she spent at Sunrise Ranch became the anchor of her week. One warm July evening, as they sat on his porch, he finally took her hand. I'm falling in love with you, Zara, he whispered. I think I have been since that first night. She had been falling right alongside him. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. In October, 6 months after the storm had brought them together, he asked her to be his wife. He knelt before her with a simple gold ring, and she said yes without a moment's hesitation. They were married in December, the valley covered in a blanket of pristine snow. The church was filled with her students and his ranch hands. It was perfect, a new beginning, built on a foundation of shared dreams. But the foundation was cracked, and the secrets buried beneath it were about to come roaring to the surface. In April, on the anniversary of their first meeting, they had a picnic by the very creek that had once trapped them. Zara, her hand on her still flat stomach, told him they were going to have a child. Clayton's joy was a pure, brilliant thing. He held her, whispering promises to their unborn son, his face buried in her hair. But later that night, as Zara slept, Clayton walked to the old barn at the edge of his property, the one he never used. He unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside. By the light of a single lantern, the barn was revealed to be not a barn at all. It was an arsenal. Rifles lined the walls. Crates of ammunition were stacked in the corners. And on a large table in the center, a detailed map of Silas Croft's ranch was spread out, marked with attack routes and vulnerabilities. This wasn't a ranch. It was a forward operating base. And Clayton Foster wasn't just a rancher. He was a man waiting for the perfect moment to burn his enemy to the ground. The birth of their son, William, changed everything. For the first time in years, Clayton felt something other than the cold, hard knot of vengeance in his gut. He held his son, this small, perfect miracle, and felt the ice around his heart begin to crack. He looked at Zara, her face radiant even in her exhaustion, and he was torn. He had a family now, a future, something to protect, something to lose. The war he had been planning for so long suddenly seemed like a reckless, selfish indulgence. That summer, Zara spoke of visiting her parents in Boston. A longing for her old life, a desire to connect the two halves of her world. Clayton agreed, but a new anxiety gnawed at him. The trip was ill-fated from the start. The train was delayed. Then a stagecoach wheel cracked on a remote mountain road, leaving them stranded. It was there that they met the crow hunting party. Their leader, Running Elk, offered them shelter in his village. Clayton, worried about the baby's safety, agreed to let Zara and William go while he stayed with the coach. It was a mistake. A terrible, life-altering mistake. The driver was supposed to return in a day. He took 3. By the time Clayton rode down into the crow camp to retrieve his family, his world had shattered. He found Zara sitting in a lodge, grinding herbs. She was safe. But the cradleboard beside her was empty. "Zara, where's Billy?" he asked, his voice tight with a dread he couldn't name. Zara looked up, and the life had gone out of her eyes. "He developed a fever," she whispered, her voice a hollow thing. Rising dove, she tried to help. She made him a tea, but it was too fast. The world stopped. The air in Clayton's lungs turned to fire. His son, his beautiful, perfect son, gone. He stumbled out of the lodge, into the sunlight that now seemed like a cruel mockery. He saw the small, fresh mound of earth beneath a cottonwood tree. Grief, raw and absolute, tore through him, ripping away the man he had started to become, and leaving only the cold, empty shell of the man he had been before. The warrior, the avenger. As they rode away from the crow camp, 2 broken people in a world of silence, Clayton knew one thing with a chilling certainty. The war was back on, and this time, there would be no mercy. Silas Croft would pay for this. He would pay for everything. He would pay with his life. The grief was a poison. It filled the spaces between them, turning their once happy home into a silent tomb. Zara moved like a ghost through the rooms, her eyes haunted. Clayton's heart, which had started to thaw, was now frozen solid. He threw himself back into his plans for revenge with a renewed, vicious focus. The death of his son was a wound that would never heal, and he directed all that pain, all that rage, at one man, Silas Croft. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that Silas was somehow responsible. There were no accidents in this valley. He began his investigation, a slow, methodical gathering of information. He learned that Silas had recently signed a lucrative deal with a mining company from Denver, a company that needed undisputed access to the entire valley, including the water rights from Clayton's land. But there was more, a darker secret. One night, Clayton cornered his old ranch hand, Joseph, a man who had been with him since the beginning. "Tell me about the Lawsons," Clayton demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Joseph's face went pale. "Boss, that was years ago. Tell me." And the story came tumbling out. 8 years ago, before Clayton had even met Zara, a man named Edward Lawson and his sister Sarah had been his neighbors. Lawson had discovered something on his land. Not gold, something more valuable. Coal, a massive, untapped seam that ran right under Silas Croft's property as well. Lawson had refused to sell. A week later, he and his wife were dead. A tragic fire. An accident. That's what everyone said. But Joseph knew better. He had seen Silas's men riding away from the Lawson ranch just before the flames had erupted. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clayton's voice was a low growl. "Croft owns everyone, boss. The sheriff, the judge. To speak up was to die. I was a coward." The pieces clicked into place. Silas hadn't just murdered Clayton's family. He had been murdering his way to an empire for years. And Edward Lawson's sister, Sarah, what happened to her? "She had a son," Joseph whispered. "Thomas. After the fire, she just disappeared. Took the boy and ran. No one's seen her since." The name hit Clayton like a physical blow. Thomas. Sarah Lawson. A desperate woman had appeared on his doorstep years ago with a son she claimed was his. A son with Lawson blue eyes. A son he had adopted. A son he loved as his own. The boy he was raising, Thomas Foster, was the rightful heir to the very land Silas Croft had killed for. The revelation was a lightning strike. This wasn't just about revenge for Clayton's family anymore. This was about justice for Thomas, about reclaiming a stolen legacy. Zara found him in the barn, staring at the map of Silas's ranch, his face a mask of cold fury. The grief had isolated them for months, but now, seeing the look on his face, she knew something had changed. "What is it?" she asked. He told her everything. The Lawsons, the coal, the fire. He told her who Thomas really was. As she listened, the fog of her own sorrow began to lift, replaced by a clean, hard anger. Her grief for her son was still a raw wound, but now it had a target. "He has to be stopped," she said, her voice a whisper of steel. "He will be," Clayton replied, "but not with guns. Not yet. We're going to dismantle his empire piece by piece. We're going to take back what he stole. For Thomas." Their shared purpose was a bridge across the chasm of their grief. For the first time in months, they weren't two broken people mourning alone. They were partners again. And they had a war to win. Their first move was not against Silas, but against his foundation of power, the railroad. The mining company's deal depended on a new spur line being built through the valley to transport the coal. That spur line required the approval of the territorial government, an approval Silas had secured through his puppet judge and generous bribes. Zara, remembering her father's connections in Boston, began to write letters. She wrote to senators, to journalists, to powerful businessmen who were rivals of the Denver Mining Company. She didn't write as a grieving mother. She wrote as an educated woman, a former schoolteacher, laying out a clear, logical case against the railroad spur. She spoke of land rights, of monopolies, of the environmental damage. She used the language of the East to fight a Western war. Meanwhile, Clayton used his knowledge of the land. He knew the proposed railroad route was dangerously unstable. He discreetly paid a down-on-his-luck surveyor to conduct a new geological assessment. The report, which Clayton made sure found its way into the right hands, detailed the high risk of rock slides and washouts. It painted the project not as a sound investment, but as a financial catastrophe waiting to happen. Doubt began to fester back east. The mining company's investors grew nervous. The territorial governor, facing political pressure from Washington, began to distance himself from the project. Silas Croft felt his carefully constructed world begin to tremble. He struck back, not with lawyers, but with violence. He sent men to intimidate the surveyor. He started a rock slide that nearly killed a crew of railroad workers. He thought he was demonstrating his power. Instead, he was confirming everything Zara had written. He was proving he was a lawless thug, not a respectable businessman. The final piece of their plan involved Thomas. One afternoon, Clayton found his adopted son in the stables, gently working with a wild Mustang, his touch patient and sure. "Thomas," Clayton began, "there's something we need to tell you. About your birth parents. They told him everything. The fire, the coal, the murder. They showed him the deed to his father's land." Thomas listened, his young face a mask of stoic grief. When they were finished, he looked up, his Lawson blue eyes clear and hard. "He killed them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Clayton said, "and he stole your future." "Then we take it back," Thomas said with a quiet resolve that made Clayton's chest ache with pride. With the backing of Zara's father in Boston, they filed a legal claim on behalf of Thomas Lawson, the sole surviving heir of Edward Lawson. The claim, supported by a mountain of evidence, Joseph's sworn testimony, the new surveyor's report, Zara's correspondence detailing Silas's campaign of intimidation, was a legal bombshell. It froze all of Silas's assets. It halted the railroad project indefinitely, and it brought a team of U.S. Marshals to Paradise Valley with a warrant for Silas Croft's arrest, for murder. Silas, cornered and facing ruin, made his last desperate stand. He barricaded himself in his ranch house with a handful of his most loyal men. When the marshals arrived, he opened fire. The siege lasted 2 days. On the final morning, with his house burning around him and his men either dead or surrendered, Silas Croft stepped onto his porch, a pistol in each hand, his face a mask of insane rage. He didn't surrender. He went down in a blaze of gunfire, a monster consumed by the violence he had created. Months later, life had begun to find a new normal. The Croft Ranch was broken up, a portion of it awarded to Thomas as restitution. One evening, Clayton found Zara standing by the small grave on the hill overlooking their ranch. The tiny wooden cross was weathered now, but the wildflowers she planted were in bloom. "I still miss him," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Every single day." Clayton put his arm around her, holding her close. "I know. I do too." They stood in silence for a long time, two survivors who had found a way to turn their deepest pain into a fight for justice. They had not gotten their son back. Nothing could do that. But they had taken a broken boy, a victim of the same evil, and given him a future. They had taken a corrupt valley and given it a chance at redemption. "It's time to go back to Boston," Zara said finally, turning to face him. Clayton looked surprised. "You want to leave?" "No," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "I want to bring my parents here, to our home. Our family is bigger now. We need them." She took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "The storm brought us together, Clayton. The grief almost tore us apart. But this, what we built from the ashes, this is what will keep us together. Forever." Clayton looked at his wife, at the incredible, unbreakable strength in her eyes. And he knew she was right. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most damaged soil. If you were moved by this story of love, loss, and the unyielding fight for justice, click the video on your screen now to see another tale where the bonds of family are tested by the harsh realities of the frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Your support helps us keep the legends of the West alive. Thank you for watching.